So let's talk about a pessimism bias. So I used to be very prone to pessimism bias, and hopefully everyone knows what pessimism is, and I don't have to give you an example of the cup. But I used to always expect the worst, and I used to always be afraid of what's coming. And they do say that people with anxiety and depression disorders do experience pessimism bias more often. And people who are prone to pessimism bias often say that this protects them from disappointments, because if you don't expect much, you will be pleasantly surprised if something good actually happens. And if you do set up high expectations and it doesn't happen, then you'll be disappointed. I used to think that I was so smart because I was a pessimist. However, what has been brought to my attention is that expecting any kind of outcome is usually futile. Pessimism bias can be harmful because we are in a state of fear and anxiety. We may be overly precautious. We may be less likely to take risks. And we may actually experience more disappointment because we don't try things as often as people who are more realism based or even optimism based. Personally, for me, pessimism bias was based more on the just world hypothesis, which I already mentioned before. And the just world hypothesis used to be the bane of my existence, because I would always think that everything had to be balanced out. And I would have this superstitious belief that if something good happened to me, then inevitably something bad was to follow, to kind of create that balance. The idea that the good and the bad balance each other out is supported by many religions. And that can create a very unhealthy worldview, because a person may assign meaning to random events. And when something happens due to, let's say, bad luck, they may see the hand of providence in this occurrence. And to me personally, it is still a very difficult thing to get over it. Anytime something good happens, I become fearful, thinking, what terrible thing is going to happen next? It is bound to happen. And it is completely irrational. It is completely based on a superstitious belief that the universe consists of an equal amount of good and evil. And there is no good and evil in the universe. The universe does not assign any value to events. They just happen. And we people tend to seek out meaning in events that are absolutely meaningless. So in this scenario, the pessimism bias can really deepen the superstitions one has. I used to always think that if I had a few bad days, then good days were coming, and when they weren't coming, I was so disappointed and I was so frustrated. I was like, the universe, were my good days? And same goes for the good days. Anytime I would experience a few good days in a row, I would be so anxious for the future. I would just be like, no, a disaster is coming my way. And it is completely irrational if you think about it. I mean, why would we think so? So pessimism bias, just like the optimism bias, are called biases because they're based on fallacious thinking. So looking at things how they are with a healthy dose of skepticism and not setting any expectations whatsoever, this is what has been helping me. And it's very difficult not to set expectations for anything you do. Becoming a realist is learning to live in the moment. It is not about the future. The future is never coming. There is no future. The future becomes now. That's all we have. We have now. We can reflect on the past to learn from it, but looking into the future, apart from the most basic preparations, is mostly futile. Not saying not to plan for anything. I'm a big planner, and that is to my detriment. I found a lot of freedom and liberation in abandoning plans and seeing what can happen on its own. And strangely, I was surprised much more often than in the past. Things kept happening that I didn't expect and I didn't know were possible, and I was often pleasantly surprised because I didn't have any expectations at all. And my pessimism bias is slowly dissolving in the reality of now, and I'm becoming less fearful of the future, even though all the facts point to the future being grim. But there is really no benefit in stressing yourself out, thinking about all of the terrible things that can happen. Yes, they can happen, but you cannot prepare for them by being overly pessimistic.